0345 6060 973. You can text 84850, or you can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player. Joining me on the show tonight, we have Conservative peer Richard Harrington, Lord Harrington. He's former Refugees Minister. He's leading a government-commissioned review into how the UK attracts foreign direct investment. Rhun ap Iorwerth is leader of Plaid Cymru and a member of the Senedd for Ynys. Jemma Forte is a broadcaster and author of the book Be Careful What You Swipe For, and co-host of the podcast The Trawl. And Francis Elliott is editor-designate, he tells me, it sounds very grand, of the House magazine, which is a magazine produced for peers and MPs. And of course, he's former political editor of The Times and biographer of David Cameron. So they're here to take your calls. Lots of calls coming in already, but we can never have too many. 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's take a call from James in Chelsea. James, hi.
Hi, Iain. Hi, panel. My question to the panel is it acceptable that a man has served over 17 years for a crime he didn't commit is now going to have to wait years for compensation?
Well, the background to this, if you haven't heard the story today, Andrew Malkinson was jailed in 2004 for raping and strangling a woman in Salford in Greater Manchester 20 years ago this month. The Court of Appeal has now reviewed his case after new evidence pointed to another suspect, and his conviction was overturned today. However, he may have to wait many years to receive compensation for the 17 years he spent in prison because he has to formally prove his innocence first. Richard Harrington, is that the way the law should really work?
No, Iain, I think it's absolutely disgraceful. And Francis' former colleague and friend and my friend Danny Finkelstein wrote a piece about this gentleman some years ago in the Times, because there's two issues, actually. One is when there's a miscarriage of justice, actually acting upon it. And that takes far too long in its own right, because there was evidence a few years ago that this was a false trial because of DNA evidence. That takes a long time to go through the process. And then secondly, the point James the caller made about actually paying out. And without, there just doesn't seem, it just doesn't seem necessary for the process to take so long. And I hope that this is a lesson and that this gentleman can enjoy the rest of his life and get what he's entitled to.
But why should he have to formally prove his innocence? The fact that the verdict has been overturned, I would have thought, ought to be sufficient.
Exactly. And I don't know how anyone can disagree with that. But, there's a number of things like that. These indeterminate sentences, there's things that are historical that we've got to get in the modern age. And I think the main thing is when all this DNA evidence comes out, it's pretty clear that it wasn't them. Very quickly they should be released, and very quickly they should be paid.
Jemma Forte.
Well, I completely agree. You feel so sorry for this man. Your sense of justice is just awful, to be in prison and your life, that part of your life wasted for something that you didn't do. But yeah, of course, it should be addressed almost instantly, really. That's what you would want if you were him and his family, wouldn't you? So you could just then move on and also use that money to enjoy yourself, which you're owed after a miscarriage of justice. And it makes me sad as well, because obviously it should be in the news. It's so important. But there are so many assaults and sexual crimes that don't get convicted, and is it ironic that one does, and it wasn't the right person? And then we've got this awful case in the news of this woman who has waived her anonymity. I'm sure you're across it, Iain. The lady that was arrested, and this CTV has gone missing, and it looks like the police she is alleging that they have raped her. And sexual violence, it's the most awful thing that can happen to a victim, but by the same standard, to be accused of it and to have not done it is unbearable.
I wonder how they work out the rate of compensation in a case like this, because there are all sorts of different ways you can do it, and it can never actually be enough. Even if he got 2 million, that couldn't compensate for 20 years wrongful imprisonment. Francis Elliott.
Yeah, exactly point I was going to make was...
Oh, sorry. We've always thought alike.
How on earth do you compensate somebody for 17 years of lost liberty? Do they do it through potential lost earnings? That seems unfair. It just seems one of those, classic pitiless bureaucracy moments where someone has introduced an additional test for, it seems to be no reason whatsoever. If you're cleared by the court, why on earth should...
I've never heard of this before.
No, it's an odd one, but...
Is it like a making sure clause? That's what it sounds like. It's weird.
Well, it's very strange, and I'd love to learn more about it because it's something new on me. Rhun ap Iorwerth, new leader of Plaid Cymru. We'll talk a little bit about your new position in just a moment. But I mean, the law is the same in Wales in this sort of thing. How do you answer James's question?
It's a good point. The law is the same in Wales, and I want to see, as a matter of urgency, the justice system devolve to Wales. And I would hope that we would devise a justice system that would be able to deal with matters in a more humane way. I listened to an interview with the gentleman today. It was gut-wrenching. He had an opportunity in 2010, I think it was, to go through a process whereby he would have been released on licence if he was happy to put his hand up and say, yes, it was me, and I'm very, very sorry. And of course, he was protesting his innocence, and he took more than another decade in prison for a crime he didn't commit. You're innocent until you're proven guilty. As far as I'm concerned, it's been proven now that he was not guilty. There was no guilty plea against, or there should not have been a guilty plea against him. Therefore, he is innocent, and he should be given that compensation as quickly as possible. How to measure it? Impossible. A constituent of mine was one of the post workers who were imprisoned because of the system that was proven to be wrong. How do you compensate somebody like that? He was a councillor, man of real standing in his community, his dignity taken away, locked in a prison cell. You can put a sum of money on it, but it's never enough, is it?
No, it isn't. It's an absolute tragedy in many ways. James, thank you very much indeed for... Well, let me come back to you, actually. What's your view on this? What do you think should happen now?
I think it should be paid out within weeks. Some of the rules that we've got surrounding this, they're totally archaic, they're totally out of date. And to go back to to the point of compensation, to having to prove that you're innocent. Well, I'm not being funny. The Court of Appeal have quashed the conviction. There's new DNA evidence saying that it quite clearly 1,000% wasn't him. So I don't know why this poor man who's had to look over his shoulder for 17 years. I'm not going to go into... I've been to prison. I've seen what happens to, rapists and stuff, and it's not pretty. So that man has had to look over his shoulder for 17 years for a crime he didn't commit. I think it's absolutely disgusting that if it is, as his barrister said, it could possibly take years to get compensation. No. This man has had his life taken away from him. Yeah, sorry.
Right, James, thank you very much indeed. Right, a text question from Jason in Bexhill-on-Sea. Should all the other bosses at NatWest lose their jobs too? Rhun. Now, this is all about Nigel Farage's complaint. Dame Alison Rose, she quit as the bank's chief executive overnight after admitting discussing Nigel Farage's finances with the BBC journalist Simon Jack and actually giving him information which turned out to be incorrect. Nigel Farage wants the managing director of Coutts, Peter Flavel, and the rest of the board of NatWest, which owns Coutts, to leave their roles too. I wonder if this is a case of quitting while you're ahead, actually, and maybe settling for the chief executive scalp, or do you think that Nigel Farage has a case, Rhun?
Put it this way, I sympathise with why Jason is asking that question, because this is about trust in banks. I think I've thought a lot about this, and I think we need to separate what's relevant to ordinary people and what's not relevant. Coutts is not an ordinary bank. It's not a normal bank. I couldn't open a bank account. I'm not sure how things are for you, Ian, but but I wouldn't be able to have it because I don't have £3 million in savings or a £1 million loan. So that's not particularly relevant. Nigel Farage isn't a normal person either. I happen to agree probably with the judgment of Coutts about him and his toxicity as a politician.
That's no reason for him not to have a bank account with them.
And of course, that's why I come to what's relevant. And the relevance here is how to what level can we trust banks to what level in this particular case can we trust them to deal with our data, information about us, not to go talking to journalists. As a journalist myself, as much as a journalist would enjoy having... I'm still a member of the National Union of Journalists, and I'll always be a journalist at heart. But there is a serious question here of trust in banks. And to me, the important question of trust in banks come to issues like how they look after ordinary people, making sure everybody has a right to a bank account, making sure that they look after the communities that they make excess profits from, and not closing down banks on our high streets. There are a raft of questions that need answering, and sacking senior members of Counts and NatWest aren't necessarily going to answer those. We need government action on a range of issues.
Do you think Nigel Farage has actually done us all a favour? Because this is happening to people all over the country. We know that from having covered this story for the last couple of weeks, where people have phoned in saying, yeah, that happened to me too. I'm not a politically exposed person, but it did happen to me, or I know someone that it's happened to.
And the issue
it needs to stop.
The issue of politically exposed persons has affected my family, in my daughters having an account taken off them because I was deemed to be a politically exposed person. I'm going to be looking into that a lot more now.
You are.
But the situation here is that Nigel Farage is looking for political validation through this. I don't think we should be giving him that political validation, but of course we should be considering those issues of trust in banks. Absolutely.
But you don't think that all the other bosses at NatWest should lose their jobs too?
Well, where there are others found to be complicit in decisions around this particular issue, absolutely hold them to account. But where do you draw the line is the key question, I think, here.
And how would you react? I mean, I don't know, I'm speculating here, but I suspect that Dame Alison Rose will be getting a fairly substantial severance payment, which if you were an ordinary bank clerk and you had done what she had done, basically briefed a journalist incorrectly, you'd just be shown the door. You wouldn't be getting any compensation too. Jemma?
I can't lie, I'm really sick of hearing about it, and I think it has dominated the news agenda in a disproportionate way. I agree that, at the heart of it, there is an issue there. You can't stop someone having a bank account because of their political beliefs. I think we're all agreed on that. But he's made his point, and now I really want him to be quiet.
But we weren't agreed at the beginning because there were a lot of people, I don't know if you were one of them, who were slightly dancing on his banking grave.
Was I?
Oh, I don't know. I just asked you if you were one of them. But there were a lot of people who would describe themselves as on the broad left, believe in civil liberties, believe in human rights, but because it was Nigel Farage, they became crypto-fascists overnight and thought it was very funny that he should lose his bank account.
I thought he'd have been offered another bank account.
I can't lie. I'm not going to lose a massive amount of sleep over Nigel Farage losing a bank account and having to bank at NatWest. Honestly, my violin is tinsy. We've got bigger issues in this country. People can't afford to eat. We've got homelessness going through the roof. We've just found out we're going to be paying £110 billion just interest on our debt. So I don't really care where Nigel Farage banks. And if it's NatWest, that's fine. That's perfectly all right.
But just remember, they didn't offer that at the time.
No.
They offered that 3 days
And
afterwards.
also, at the beginning, there was some misinformation, I think, that said he hadn't met the threshold. So again, I was like, oh, let's all cry. But now it has come to light that there was a different issue there. And I do agree that is wrong. And the woman's gone. So for me, that's that. I don't believe. Now, I'm sorry, Suella Braverman was sacked for leaking private information. She's the Home Secretary.
She was sacked, but then for some strange reason she was allowed back, which none of us can understand.
So I think there's a bit of hypocrisy here, and I do think that Nigel Farage is like an absolute expert at confecting outrage and putting himself in the limelight for his own gain, and I am bored of hearing from him.
Okay, Francis.
I have to say I have slightly enjoyed the sight of the people for whom Nigel Farage is not a pin-up, having to bite hard and accept that they got this one badly wrong, and accept that it is not right, in fact, to debank somebody because you don't like their views. But I challenge. I mean, is it really lots of people have been affected by this? I know that a lot of politically exposed. I know it affects a lot of politicians, and it's one of those. Harriet Baldwin, a Treasury Minister, now chair of the. I think is she chair of the Treasury Select Committee these days.
Yeah.
She's back. 3 or 4 years ago, she was saying this is going to blow. So it's one of those things that's been bubbling around for a while. But I still haven't completely got my head round whether or not it was a commercial decision or not, because they're saying, clearly it was wrong to say that he was he didn't meet the threshold, because he did. But if they took a commercial decision that he was not worth the candle, is that fair enough?
Well,
it's tricky, isn't it?
That's what she briefed Simon Jack, the BBC journalist. That was what it was all about.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Simon Jack was besieged by Coots customers saying, well, I don't meet that level. They haven't got rid of me.
Yeah.
So it's all
No.
strange.
I mean, I think as soon as she made her apology and admission, and I felt like, I said to my family, she'll be gone by tomorrow, and she was. It was clearly untenable because of that. But it's a bit jumping the shark going after Howard Davis and all the rest of them.
What do you feel about Simon Jack's position? Was he just doing his job in reporting, or do you think he's got questions to answer?
Well, didn't the BBC statement say something like, we went back and checked that? I mean, I think where she was under massive pressure was her account was it was inadvertent, left him with the impression that he did not meet the threshold, and the BBC position was, no, we told you the story we were going to write, we went back to you. I think you're within your rights if the chief executive of a bank tells you information and you go back and check. What failure of journalism is that? I mean, it's horrible for Simon Jack. His reputation's been kind of tarnished by this, so I mean, he'll be cross.
Richard?
I can't think why anyone would want a bank with Coots. It seems to me it's full of flash Essex boys and the Revis
Hang on. Flash Essex boys.
Exactly. I need say no more, Ian. But in all
right, you won't say any more.
In all seriousness, it's just a populist dream for Farage, isn't it? Because it's part of his anti-woke agenda, and he loves it. He really loves it, and I hate the fact that it gives him oxygen. But on the more serious note, and the PEP thing is out of control. I mean, a few weeks ago, I went to Rome for a few days. I go to the Bureau de Change at the airport to get €200, and they look on the screen and they say, you're a politically exposed person, we can't give it to you.
No.
They did. I actually walked to the ATM next to there, put in my card and got it. But it is ridiculous.
That
I
is
actually
pathetic, isn't it?
It is. I was with Stuart Pollack, who you know, Ian. He was a witness. We couldn't believe it. I thought
Just
it was a
explain
joke.
to me what happened there. You couldn't get cash because
I came up flagged on the system. Now, it's actually the regulators' fault because the banks can deal with politically exposed people. It's a management time. It's a pain in the neck for them. So they'd rather not have people who are politically exposed, because even if you want a few £100 or euros, they have to ask where you got it from and all that kind of stuff. So, but putting all that to one side and back to the core question, who should be sacked? Well, I think in the end, that the buck has to stop with the chief executive because of what she said to the journalist. As far as Coots themselves are concerned, if there was a fault of line management, that is, they said they didn't want him against the rules because a person is of a certain political nature, then they should go as well. But the chairman of NatWest, whose responsibility for all shareholders, stakeholders, the government and the whole board, this is Farage just milking it for his own fun, and I think we should just put an end to it.
OK, right, thank you very much indeed. Somebody on a text says here, if it happened to you, you'd sympathise with Farage. Your leftist panellist needs to give her head a wobble. I think the clue there is her, Jemma. So you can spend the break giving your head a good wobble. It's 21 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 23 minutes past 8. We have Lord Richard Harrington with us, Conservative peer. Rhun ap Iorwerth. Have I pronounced that in an acceptable
that's
fashion?
Pretty good, Ian.
Thank
Pretty
God.
good.
You are the new leader of Plaid Cymru. Now, I interviewed Adam Price, your predecessor, back in March, and of course, about a few weeks later, I think I put the curse on him. He decided that he'd had enough. And well, actually, did the party decide
You're not
they'd had
cursing me
enough?
this second, Ian.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure it's wise of you to come on the programme, but we'll soon see. How are you different to Adam Price in your priorities? Obviously, you both believe in independence for Wales, but what's your main selling point to your party?
Oh, listen, I'll look at what we've got in common. I'm very much building on the work that Adam did and the work that he built upon after his predecessor. So I'm clear in my mind that this isn't as good as it gets for Wales. I don't think it is something that has to be inevitable, that we have a quarter of our children living in poverty, that we're not reaching our potential in terms of economic prosperity, that we have so much inequality in Wales. And my agenda, quite simply, is to build a more confident, a fairer, a greener, more prosperous Wales, and to talk up our game as a country. We're far too often on the back foot, and I want to move onto the front foot and do politics in a positive way, which is the only way I can do it.
Aren't those words that Mark Drakeford could have uttered?
I don't think so, because I think fundamentally being a Labour Party in Wales that is, ultimately under a UK Labour Party led by Keir Starmer, who doesn't show much interest in Wales, I think it's fair to say, sets him apart from our kind of politics, which will always put the interests of Welsh people first, people living in Wales who aspire to more than they are told they can aspire to at the moment. And it's about building that confident nation.
Well, if you'd like to ask a question about Wales and independence, you're perfectly free to do so. 0345 6060 973. I'd like to hear our other panellists' views on that as well, I have to say. And any other subject that you might like to ask. 0345 6060 973. Shuvik's in Eltham. Hello, Shuvik.
Hello, Ian. Yes, I'd like to ask the panel, has Brexit affected investment into the UK?
Richard Harrington.
I thought I might get that one in. Well, I started doing this review for Jeremy Hunt on that very subject because foreign direct investment has gone down significantly, actually since 2008, if you exclude renewables. And I've learned, it's very easy for right-wing conservatives to say, oh, it's corporation tax, or for people, shall we say, more of my view to say it's Brexit. But having interviewed more than 150 companies, funds and people like that, I'm not saying those two aren't factors, but they're not the most significant. The way the government organises itself, the way it takes a long time to get a decision, people have moved from department to department in government, often with conflicting policy views, and the fact that we don't have a slick sales and marketing operation that can override all of this to deal with investments, I think is more of the problem. But there's no question about it. For market access, those companies like manufacturers that need just-in-time and market access, the friction that's come with being outside of the single market puts us at a competitive disadvantage because it's time and money.
But in terms of foreign direct investment, it always used to be something that the Conservatives shouted about, that we had more than the rest of the EU put together, a lot of it coming from the United States, but not just the United States. Compared to Germany and France at the moment, how are we faring?
Well, we're still doing quite well. It's not an absolute disaster by any means, but we're losing deals to Ireland, we're losing deals to France and Spain. And, the world's moved. The fact is capitalism has changed. Those people that have these views that the market will take care of it, it's just not how things are. Countries are subsidising businesses because they want to attract them for the
Haven't
value
we just
that it
done
adds.
that with the battery factory?
We have, and that's one deal that took nearly 2 years, actually, of absolute agony to get where it is. And that's a very good case in point. We got that one. On the other hand, we lost AstraZeneca after a similar process. And there's others. So it's not...
Well, they did put that down to corporation tax, didn't they?
Well, my team have spent hours and hours with them. That there's a lot of different things to it. And corporation tax really is not that relevant for companies like AstraZeneca because of all
They
the...
said it was. I remember at the time.
It was a factor in, but it's below the line, and companies like AstraZeneca don't pay that much because of R&D and everything else. If it was 0 or 80%, of course it's a fact, but within a band, it's not so significant.
Francis Elliott.
Oh, clearly it's in fact. I mean, the straight answer to the question is yes. But if I may just interrogate a little bit what you said, Richard. I mean, what is there any closer relationship, short of full single market membership, that might change the dial? I mean, we've got the review of the deal coming up within a couple of years. What would you like to see change, or what are the companies saying to you that they most want to see change?
They would like to see frictionless trade, which basically means...
Single market.
It does mean a single market. And the great irony of it is many of the Brexit people would have gone for a single market. I think it's a great tragedy that didn't happen.
So why don't we have the debate about the single market? Why is that debate not started now?
I think it will come inevitably. But the reality is we haven't even settled in yet to the post-Brexit phase. I must say I've not seen any advantages of Brexit from a business point of view. There may well be with divergence and things. But for our real benefit in this country, which was manufactured goods, which basically I saw the president of Toyota say at a dinner with Theresa May, when we were arguing about Brexit, there was a small motor industry dinner at number 10, and he said, I want to pay tribute to the greatest European of all time, Mrs. Thatcher, who persuaded my father to come to this country because of the big market in Europe.
But your party's just not prepared to have that debate. In fact, Labour Party's not prepared to have the debate.
Tobias Ellwood is.
He's very much on his own.
In Afghanistan, actually.
I'm not sure to use his name in the current circumstances to your advantage.
No,
Jemma.
no, absolutely not. But he was calling for it the other week
in an interview with me, as it goes.
But I think, Francis, the real thing is
self-publicity.
Free trade. A lot of people say, I'm a free trade. I believe in free trade. It isn't the tariffs. No. It's the friction.
Yeah.
And if there's a way of...
It's the botheration, isn't it?
Like people queuing up for passports.
Which is about
all
to
the
get
time.
worse, isn't it, in October?
Yep. I'm afraid so.
Yeah.
Jemma.
Well,
as brief as you like, because we need to go to the news in a minute, and we've got Rhun to go as well.
Okay. Well, I don't even you're speaking to all of these people directly. I'm just in. Which was the deal? Because you'll know where the British government paid 500 million quid to entice them over here, and it was a bit like a bribe.
That was the battery deal.
That was the battery one.
Yeah.
I mean, in my view, Brexit has hindered and made everything more difficult. There you go. Short answer.
Rhun.
I've got the Port of Holyhead in my constituency. Port of Holyhead grew in its trade by, I remember the figure, 693% post joining the single market. And now we're feeling the pain of not being in that single market. And Francis is absolutely spot on. It's that unwillingness of, OK, the Conservatives, perhaps we wouldn't expect better, but even Labour to accept that they need to be having this debate right now. Plaid Cymru is very, very clear. We need to be having that debate on getting back into the single market and customs union. And in fact, when Conservatives were accusing us of, ignoring the Brexit debate. Yes, I was devastated by the Brexit vote, rather. I was devastated by the Brexit vote, but we put together alternative ways of leaving the European Union just to look after our interests as a country. Would have worked for the UK as well, and that would have meant leaving but remaining in the single market and the customs union. And Labour have to admit, surely, that Brexit is the mess that it is.
It always fascinates me that nationalist politicians, whether in Scotland or Wales, want to cede sovereignty to the European Union, but they don't want to cede sovereignty to the British Parliament. It's complete hypocrisy.
But my independent Wales isn't an isolationist. It's not North Korea, for goodness sake. This is my Wales has new relations with England, with Scotland, with the European Union.
You want to withdraw from the UK single market, but go back into the European one, when most of the Welsh trade is with England and Scotland rather than with the rest of the EU.
I'd much rather be with clear and free trading arrangements with our partners within these islands and across the European Union. And that's what's been taken away from us with that Brexit vote and the refusal now of Labour even to say, there might be another way of perhaps getting a middle ground. It's been a disaster. It needs to be admitted as such.
All the leading proponents of Brexit said we wouldn't leave the single market. So Gove said that, Daniel Hannan said that, etc. Boris Johnson said that. And I just feel like if we had left but stayed in the single market, everybody would be a lot happier. Everybody, including people that didn't want to leave, because we wouldn't be so hampered with our business, and we'd be financially better off.
We are where we are.
We are. We've got that fabulous CPPT trade. Brilliant. 1.8 billion over 10 years.
See again, that is just so typical. Why would you not be in favour of a big trade deal with those big countries?
Got no say over there, and it's miles away, and it's not environmentally friendly. And we just spent the same amount.
We live in a globalised world, Gemma. In case you hadn't noticed, it's a world economy now. It's not a continental economy. But we've got
neighbours, which is a bigger trade bloc next door. That's just more sensible.
And our exports to the EU have gone up exponentially since Brexit. Funnily enough,
and we've got a trade deal with the Faroe Islands. Do not forget that.
Exactly. And the one that we've just done with the CPPT.
You really are Remainer to your last, Richard, aren't you?
The only place that we didn't have a trade deal with before was Malaysia, so we're going to get palm oil from there. And they've just spent. It was the Express tried to tell their readers last week that it was a 12 trillion Brexit bonus. I was like, oh my God, we can have furlough. We can just stay at home.
Is I have furthered British-Malaysian relations by interviewing a Malaysian drag queen the other day. 8:34 on LBC News Headlines with Tim Daly.
The death has been announced this evening of the Irish singer Sinead O'Connor. She was 56 and became world famous after the release of Nothing Compares to You in 1990. The British billionaire Joe Lewis, whose family owned Tottenham Hotspur, has pleaded not guilty to charges of insider trading in the United States. The 86-year-old handed himself over to the authorities. His lawyers insist he's a man of impeccable integrity. And a trade union is claiming iron brew supplies could be about to dry up. Unite says a 9-day pay strike by lorry and shunter drivers at AG Bar in North Lanarkshire next month could affect stock levels. LBC weather: rain spreading across eastern areas tonight. That rain will be heavy in places, but it will clear from Northern Ireland, Wales and Western England, although light showers could remain. We'll see a low of 6 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:37. Richard Harrington, Rhun up. So I knew at some point I would do that. Rhun up Iorwerth.
Not bad. Not quite as good as last time, but not bad.
All right, okay, I'll settle for that. Jemma Forte and Francis Elliott are all with us answering your questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you'd like to ask some question, and text 84850. A text question from Ali in Birmingham. There are now 20 people competing for every rented property. Is it about time everyone stops demonising landlords and making us all want to just sell up and quit? Now, figures from the property site Rightmove says there are now an average of 20 requests to view each rental property it lists, up from 6 per property in 2019. In the northwest of England, there are 30 requests per property. It's funny because we always think London and the southeast is the hotbed of rentals, and obviously from those statistics, not necessarily the case. Jemma?
I don't know how you solve it, but the situation is dire. You know, you hear these anecdotes about a flat coming on the market and you've got 60 people going round by 11 o'clock in the morning. And actually, I think the landlords that, you know, who are stressed. They're suddenly having to pick somebody and like they're basing it on quite strange criteria in the end. I think that there was a period where people who had some income to invest bought properties. It was when Sarah Beanie was on the telly a lot. And it was relatively easy to make a bit of money out of it. Those times have definitely gone. And I don't know what you do. I look at my kids, I'm like, they'll be living with me till they're 45? I don't know. I don't know what you do. I think that the housing market has got to, the top of it has got to come off. I'm not saying I want a crash, of course I don't, but I do think that something needs to happen. And I wonder whether this Liz Truss catastrophe and the fact that all of our mortgages have gone through the roof might mean that the top comes off the housing market, and long term, if you're thinking about renters, maybe that's a good thing.
Well, I think it is. I mean, I've got property alerts on Zoopla and Rightmove because thinking moving house. And there are more alerts coming through now saying that so-and-so has knocked 100,000 off this house rather than new properties coming onto the market. So that is evidence that there is a downturn going on in... Well, cooling off, that's a good way of putting it. Rhun, what's it like in Wales?
Awful. Similar picture. Too many people looking for too few houses. I'm a landlord myself and one of those sort of accidental landlords. I don't feel demonised. I think rules that have come in Wales that I support are there to make sure that landlords behave in a responsible way towards their tenants. I've had the same tenant family in for 10 years, and you know it's good to be able to offer a home in that way. You know what's making it difficult for landlords isn't those rules, but the fact that Liz Truss's disastrous management of the economy has sent mortgage rates shooting up. I don't think the rent is covering the mortgage on you know lots of properties now, but we're paying the price for failing to make sure that there is adequate investment, or there has been adequate investment in social housing over the years. You know, a lack of ability by governments on the UK level, for us in Wales, on a Welsh level, to build enough houses for rent, for social rents, for assisted buying schemes, for example. And now we're really paying the price for that, and we've got to make sure that government takes action to address it. But of course, now the challenge is all that much greater because of the situation we find ourselves in.
You know, you'd better be hopeful that there's no one in our digital team that's feeling in a naughty mood tonight, because I just said, what's it like in Wales, Rhun? And you said, awful. You can see that as a Twitter viral clip, can't you? But Richard Harrington.
Well, I think the situation is awful for renters. There are two reasons. First of all, the supply is not there, and the supply is not there because of the general NIMBY policies against the development. In other countries...
By your Conservative MP colleagues.
Well, by a party that you worked for in the past yourself, Ian. But
much longer ago.
No, I wouldn't say so. Mr Davis is alive and well and often asked how you are.
And kicking.
Yes, exactly. Kicking everybody in sight, really. But on to the more serious point. The reality is that in other countries, Germany is a good example, institutions build loads of nice blocks of flats for rental. And there was a movement towards that for some years. 2010 in Watford, there was a big block built by Richard Olsen, a very successful property developer, for letting. And that I really saw some hope there. because it was
Why
meant...
doesn't that happen here, though?
Because of the difficulty in the years it takes to get planning permission, the cost of doing so, the objection from everybody. And now, with the changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, which I could bore for many years about, already having gone on about Brexit, I won't, but it's reducing the land supply and therefore the property available for rental. But the second thing is, before I've had enough of my say and you turn on to somebody else, there's been a lot of changes in tax laws and other things that have disincentivised private landlords. Some of them are environment things, etc. And I do take your point, these are necessary, but nevertheless they make it more difficult. Some of it is the tax deductibility of mortgages. The cost of mortgages, I agree, have gone up. And something has to be done, because when I came to London with a couple of mates in the late 70s, it was only, you had to work for a company that would sponsor your let, because there was private landlords didn't really exist. And then there was a liberalisation of it, more stock came on the market, but something has to be done, and I'm afraid it's moving in the wrong direction.
Okay, Francis.
Well, both my grown-up sons rent, and I was shocked by how quickly they had to move to get to the market and how awful it is, and frankly... Expensive, so expensive. One's in Glasgow, one's in Exeter, and they're paying a fortune.
Do they not like each other?
For not very much money. They're at different universities as it goes. But, yeah, I mean, careful what you wish for in terms of the mortgage, increased interest rates and what happens to the housing market. It's clearly a very complex relationship, and it's not clear to me that rising interest rates will free up more, property for rent. It's clearly working in the opposite direction at the moment. But Richard's absolutely right. Housing and planning over the last 2 decades, and I blame both parties, has been, disastrous. And we built a politics and baked in a politics around a particular model that, included buy-to-let landlords, and we're paying the price for it.
Rhun.
Yeah, one of the issues that we're facing in certainly my constituency and in many areas of Wales is the proliferation of second homes and the impact that that's had on the market. The number of homes being taken out of the residential market for rent or purchase, a quarter or more of all properties in towns or villages that are second homes, the effect that has on pushing up prices out of the reach of local buyers or renters. And that's why we've been able in the last year and a half, through a cooperation agreement with Welsh Government, to bring in a series of measures to address this issue, because there is a realisation now that it is such an awful problem.
And it's such a huge proportion of people's wages they're spending on rent. There is no disposable income. And I hate that kind of thing that happens sometimes in certain papers where they say, well, if young people just stop buying lattes, they could save up and buy a house. And it's like, it's really not true. They'd have to stay in for 20 years before they could afford a place. And I know you're doing an hour of radio later about why some people are choosing not to have children, or
Yes,
the birth rate is going down. And I think that when I talk to my kids' friends and everything, when I grew up, it was a given that you did things in a certain order, and that if you got yourself a job and you saved up a bit, and then you get a flat, and then you kind of get a home. And I think there's a natural nesting instinct in us as humans, that you create a home and then you have a family, and that's the order that feels safest to do things in. And now having a home just isn't a given. If you're renting and you don't, your landlord might kick you out, and you basically cannot really afford to be living in that place, it's not conducive to putting down those roots, and I think that's very sad.
I think the point that someone made about, well, in fact, the questioner made about demonising landlords is a really important one, because not all landlords are bad. I would say, you would hope that 90% of them at least were rather good, but of course you just hear about the bad experiences that people have, rarely about the good ones. Right, we'll move on in a moment. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. It's 8:46.
LBC Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:48 on Cross Question. Richard Harrington, Rhun ap Iorwerth is with us. Jemma Forte is here, and Francis Elliott. Ruth in Devon has texted, if Wales were to become independent, what would its main exports be? What would its main sources of income be? I think I'm going to excuse three of you on this one. You'll all be very relieved. Rhun.
I mean, thanks very much for the question. I mean, plenty of exports. Thankfully, we have a decent manufacturing base still. I mean, we have growing sectors. We can look at digital and those areas where we have a huge amount of potential. But surely, when it comes to energy, renewables, our natural resources just haven't been tapped into in a way that they should. When we look at our water and the power that gives us as a country too. But as always, our export is our people, and the skills that they have to build.
That's a really wishy-washy answer. What is the main Welsh export?
The main Welsh export of the future, without doubt, is going to be energy.
No, but now, if you look at the figures of goods exported from Wales, what's the biggest one?
I probably wouldn't be able to name the actual sector, but if you look at manufacturing,
that's incredible for the leader of Plaid Cymru not to be able to answer that.
As I say, we have an industrial base that has been stripped of what it could be, but that still has an awful amount of potential in it. But I'm looking to the future and that Wales that we're trying to build, that confident Wales, and that has the resources in order to have foundations to grow on. And whether it's in my part of the world with its strongest tide in Europe, when I look at the developments in years to come in hydrogen technology, when I look at the technology in years to come in floating offshore wind, how we tie that into, we're lucky we have a very big customer in England across the border. I have no doubt that we have that ability to have a foundation.
We'd be slapping tariffs on you, though.
Well, if that's the relationship that you think Wales and England want to have with each other, I see it in a very different way. I'm very positive about the relationship with England.
And if you want to comment on this at all?
No.
No?
Are you in favour of small nuclear moderators in Ynys, for instance? I mean, is that something you're open to as a party?
Yeah, I mean, I've always worked positively with the developers that were looking at a new power station in Wilva. I've taken the position that where there are skills in the nuclear sector, we have two ex-nuclear generating areas, that we would be wise to look at how we tap into those skills again in future. And I have no doubt that it would be the smaller nuclear that would make sense. But I think when we look at our real potential and the steps that we should be taking now, when I see the growth in renewables in particular, that's where we can take some very early action.
I mean, I think what your political opponents in Wales would say is that the Wales economy is actually, you've got North Wales, which links very much to the northwest, and South Wales, which is the M4 corridor. So it's very difficult for Wales to have an internally integral kind of industrial strategy that makes sense.
Well,
on a north-south basis.
You make a very good point in that sort of the lack of investment that there's been in connectivity in Wales, for example, the lack of spending on rail infrastructure in Wales, on connectivity within the country, makes it necessary for us to be looking eastwards to our customers.
There's also geography. There's the Black Mountains in the middle of
But what I'm saying is that that's a positive thing. You look across the whole of Europe and those sort of porous borders between sovereign countries, members of the European Union, or those just outside the European Union. There's nothing in a border, if you get the agreements in place, that stops you doing trade. And to me, what I see in our friends in the northwest of England are people that I want to do business with. I have a great European capital in Dublin, just a few tens of miles to the west of me on Anglesey. These are trading partners, which is why when you look at Brexit and the impact that it has had.
Back to the B word.
Well, but it's true. I live there. I live on the European border near Holyhead. When I see us not being able to maximise the benefits of those cross-border links, that frustrates me. I'm seeing a country that's unable to reach its potential there, again, with losing the European links. But the great cities of Liverpool, where my mother was from, and Manchester, they're trading partners for us. So I'll always want that border, that trade with England, to be as strong and mutually beneficial as possible.
Nick says, I've never heard Iain Dale say a single positive thing about Wales. Well, you haven't been listening very very hard. I have a great love of. In fact, I was nearly a Welsh MP once. I applied to be MP for Monmouth, which of course David T.C. Davis got, and this was back.
What did you say to upset them?
Well, no, it's a bit more complicated than that. I didn't upset them. In fact, I got on really well with them. And even now, 15, 20 years on, I still get people coming up to me at a Tory party conference saying, "Oh, we remember you fondly." But David organised his troops rather well in that selection, shall we say. But I have to admit, I hadn't ever been to Wales before that, which might have been a bit
So you're like Boris Johnson, who somebody tried to get selected in Wales.
It might have been a bit of a disadvantage, I have to say. But I love the Welsh accent. I love Cardiff.
What's the Welsh accent?
Well, there's different ones, aren't there? But I love your accent. But Cardiff is one of my favourite cities in the UK.
It's a wonderful city.
Don't make me out to be anti-Welsh.
I did panto in Rhyl once.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, that's a conversation. Actually, I've heard you talk about this
I thought
before.
I recognised you.
Oh, no, you didn't.
Oh, no, yeah. Beat me to it. Right, let's move on to... Now, you know it's July when you get a question like this. Nick in Slough, do you think it's time for House of Lords reform?
Yes.
Yes.
Why?
I think that the House of Lords is a necessary mechanism, but I think perhaps the hereditary peers idea is archaic and out of date. I don't believe that bishops should be put in there either. I think, that's what I think. And I think that...
should it be elected or appointed, or still have a certain appointed element?
I don't mind them being appointed, but I do think there needs to be criteria. And I think most of the people in there, apart from the hereditary ones and the bishops, have been put in there for a reason. But recently, I think the lists have got way too big, and there needs to be some kind of cap. And I don't believe that Liz Truss earned the right to stuff any peers in there. I just don't.
Well, she hasn't yet.
No, we'll see what happens. But also, all this hissy fit around Nadine Dorries is a joke. And actually, whilst I think it's good to have younger peers going in, I think that's needed. I am one of those people who's like, why is Charlotte Owen going in there? And I want to give her a chance. She might be great. But it's such a privilege to be in there for life. And I just feel you're on this sort of, you're getting paid for life. And I really think there needs to be some reason that you've been put in there.
Well, Francis, given your new job, you can't obviously afford to upset any members of the House of Lords with your answer, can you? But try.
Thank you for that kind invitation. All I would say is House of Lords reform has been the ruin of many a poor young lad. Tony Blair, David Cameron, and I don't anticipate Keir Starmer's going to rush into that particular bear trap. But I think hereditaries are definitely in the, it's an easy thing for them to do if short of full reform. Put it that way.
Apart from the 92 hereditary peers that are there, who's going to think it's a bad idea to get rid of them? Seriously. Richard, as a member of the House of Lords.
I heard that Iain was on Liz Truss's list, just in case
I can assure you that's not the case, given the things I've said about her.
That's what I meant, Iain. I've lost my train of thought. It's far too big. I think there's a place for a House of Lords as a kind of advisory committee. One of the reasons I vote for stuff that I don't believe in is because in the end I think the Commons has to decide, and it's right that that's the sovereign body, and I think it's right that the Lords is asked to come up with its views, suggest alterations, but if the Commons rejects them, then the Commons must hold supreme. But there's far too many. There should be a retirement age, and we need a way of appointment that gets people who normally wouldn't be seen dead standing for a political party, who are very good. How that's done, maybe by an independent appointments commission, but we have to try and depoliticise it if we can.
Rhun?
I believe in democracy, and I think it's crazy that we have an elected chamber. Of course, I wouldn't have either of them, but having a second chamber can absolutely make sense. But it makes no sense whatsoever to me that you have people without having gone through any sort of democratic process deciding on legislation.
Are there Plaid peers?
Yes, David Wigley currently does a fantastic job for us. It's the best place for him to be campaigning against an unelected House of Lords. On the benches in the House of Lords.
The SNP don't nominate peers, do they?
No, and it's been a live debate within Plaid Cymru. It's caused some division in the past. I'm very clear in my mind. Where there is a platform, we should be using that platform in order to push for the best for Wales. But one of the things that we can argue in there is for the democratisation of the House of Lords as it is, as a step towards not being reliant on it at all.
Do you get to nominate?
Yes, but how much time have we got? Put it this way, we have one Lord that has been nominated. We have had MPs unbroken in Westminster since the 1970s. Gwynfor Evans was elected first in 1966, one Lord. They're not even pretending that this reflects democratic.
You only ever had one since 1966.
Yeah, and crossbencher in David Ellis Thomas as well. They're not even pretending, are they, that this reflects the UK of today. It's preposterous.
There's a good campaign for your first campaign in the House magazine, Francis. More Lords for Plaid Cymru.
Well, Gordon Brown's idea is I think one of his ideas is to address the democratic deficit as people would see it in the devolved nations by making them more reflective of. Certainly, I think that's
having them at least try would be something.
Yeah.
Our dreaded fun question at the end of the programme is from Ben in Southport. A pilot in the US says the American government is downplaying the threat of UFOs, saying they're actually being seen all the time. If aliens do exist, and the truth is obviously out there, and you were to be introduced to a visiting ET, where would you take them first, and what would you do together? Why is it always in America that people think that UFOs are? You never hear from anywhere else in the world, do you, Jemma?
No. I'm going to a festival next weekend. We're doing our podcast there, and there's a very interesting dress code. I think it's rabbits, floral, and end of days. So I'd take them there, and then I'd sit the alien down.
Everyone's going to be on drugs.
I don't know. I won't be. I've got to perform. And then I'm going to take the Times from last weekend and go, what do you make of that? Because it was amazing, wasn't it? The juxtaposition. There was a big picture of roads, terrible, and flames and the red sky. And next to it said, Starmer and Sunak to row back on green pledges. And I'd go, yeah, how's your planet? Because I might need to come over there. That's what I do.
Richard?
Oh, I'd take them to Coots to open a bank account.
Rhun?
Have they the ability to time travel? Could I take them to the future? Could I take them to watch
to
Wales?
Independent Wales.
To an independent Wales. But they wouldn't agree to come because they wouldn't believe that it hadn't happened already. So there you go.
Francis?
I'd take them to see E.T. because I never saw it as a kid and I'd like to see it.
Did you not?
No, I know, it's a massive
Fantastic film, much better than Gremlins. And on that controversial bombshell note, we will bring cross question tonight to an end. Thank you to Rhun. Hopefully you'll come back again when you're next in London. To Richard Harrington, to Jemma Forte and Francis Elliott. Good luck when you take over as editor.
Thank you.
And we'll have you all back very, very soon. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to talk about the fact that, where are we? Only half of Generation Z, or do I have to say Generation Z, and millennials plan to start a family as finances and global anxieties put them off having children. This is according to a survey out today of 18 to 34-year-olds, 25% of whom, 1 in 4, had ruled out ever having a baby. Have you come to that conclusion? And if so, why? Is it mainly due to financial pressures, or is it because you don't want to bring a child into this world that in 50 years might be too hot to live in? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the Irish Prime Minister's been leading the tributes to the singer Sinead O'Connor, who's died at the age of 56. In a nod to the record which brought her worldwide fame, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said her talent was unmatched and beyond compare. Her death comes 18 months after her son took his own life.